Hello guys, in this video I wanted to talk about Cormac McCarthy as a screenplay writer. I have all his screenplays here and I recently read The Counselor and I've read all his screenplays except actually The Gardener's Son, which I haven't gotten to yet. But I feel like I have enough of an idea about how his screenplays have turned out to just talk a little bit about it, because ultimately Cormac McCarthy failed as a screenplay writer, and I think we should be happy about that, because if he had been more successful, he might not have churned out the novels that he was subsequently famous for, especially Suttree and Blood Meridian. So Cormac McCarthy's story with screenplay writing goes all the way back to the 70s. So he had published Orchard Keeper, Outer Dark, and Child of God, and he was working on Suttree and Blood Meridian. He worked on both those novels at the same time, even though he finished Blood Meridian much later. But in general, Cormac McCarthy worked on multiple novels at a time. And during this process, he's been, for whatever reason, very interested in writing movie scripts and stage plays and so on for a long time. And in the 70s, he wrote The Gardener's Son, which ultimately got turned into a direct to TV movie in the 70s. And while it did actually get nominated for some Emmys and achieve some initial acclaim, it's been largely lost in history. And then another screenplay of his is The Stonemason, which I actually quite enjoyed. And his description of The Stonemason is a play in 5 acts. So he's written The Stonemason for the stage to be performed in a theater. It has, as far as I know, and as far as other people that are familiar with McCarthy's history knows, it has never been produced. It's almost impossible to put on a stage for a number of reasons. There is the problem with the character of Ben, who is simultaneously the main character in the story and also this sort of entity that is delivering some monologues at the same time, but sort of outside of the main story. So how are we going to put that on a stage? Then you would also have to construct a large brick wall. There are multiple settings in here that would be difficult to achieve on a stage. And initially, there were some theaters that were interested in trying to make a play out of it. And they had dialogue with Cormac McCarthy about what would be required, and they suggested some changes. And at that time, at least, McCarthy wasn't interested in making any changes to his screenplay as it was. He believed that it was up to the production staff to make it work. So consequently, it never worked. Then you can say you have Sunset Limited, which he describes, or as his publisher describes, as a novel in dramatic form. So interestingly enough, this has been put on a stage, and is probably the screenplay that is, or the play that is most easily adaptable to a stage, but it's most known for being put into a movie. And during the production of this play for the stage on the Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago, McCarthy also engaged with the production staff. And at this point in his career, he was more open to make changes. So he did accommodate some suggestions that the production staff and the actors came with. Most significantly, the actors raised the question of why White stays in the apartment. Why doesn't he just get up and leave? And because of that, McCarthy wrote into the play sort of more of these sequences of White sort of, he doesn't leave, but he says, "Oh, I really gotta go," and he sort of takes some steps in order to at least try to get up and leave, and then Black eventually convinces him to just stay a bit longer. But they built that into the play in order to get more of this feeling of White's impatience and his desire to actually just get out of the place and commit his suicide, right? So this is a novel in dramatic form, whatever that means, and it's probably the most successful of his screenplays. Um, then we have the one that I recently completed, The Counselor, which I like it, but it's not a very good play or screenplay. And it got turned into a movie which had all the ingredients for a huge success. By this time, 2012, Cormac McCarthy was an acclaimed writer. He wrote a script. He churned this out in 5 weeks. It got produced by Ridley Scott. It starred Brad Pitt, Javier Bardem, Michael Fassbender, Cameron Diaz. Had a huge budget. It should have been a blockbuster success, but instead it failed critically and popularly, and it didn't even recover its production cost. And when you read the play, it's like, you know, McCarthy's doing his best, in my opinion, to streamline the story in The Counselor to make it easily adaptable. He's dumbing it down as much as he can stomach to do, but he's not doing it enough. He's still putting in his dialogues, his sort of vernacular dialogues that are very good, and all his you know his typical Cormac McCarthy aspects of storytelling, which makes it difficult to adapt. But ultimately, same as with The Gardener's Son and Stonemason, Cormac McCarthy was stubborn in the sense that he didn't want to change anything in order to make it more easy to adapt his his uh, his plays or his screenplays into actual movies, even though he really wanted that to happen, but he just couldn't compromise with his artistic integrity, and we should probably be very happy about that. But ultimately, as a playwright, he has more or less failed, and then he decided to spend more time on writing his novels, which we are all, I think, those of us who like Cormac McCarthy, quite thankful for, because they are much, much, much better. And I guess because he later on in his career did that shift, he also ended up um, ditching Cities of the Plain as a screenplay, which is how he originally wrote it, and then turned it into a novel. And then, ironically, he wrote No Country for Old Men as a screenplay. It wasn't very good, it seems, from the archives and people who have studied that. And then he turned it into a novel, which then got turned into an epic movie directed by the Coen brothers. So, in roundabout ways, he managed to succeed, but only by not writing a screenplay, but actually writing a novel, and then having more capable directors, the Coen brothers, than Ridley Scott. If we go back to The Council a bit, just to dwell on that, because I recently finished it, I do think it's an interesting story. If you read it, it's sort of in the same vein as No Country for Old Men. It's about the drug trade around the border of Mexico, but where No Country for Old Men sort of shows us the blunt end of that environment and all the violence. There is also a lot of violence in this, but here we follow this unnamed character, a typical McCarthy thing, only referred to as the counselor, a middleman, a lawyer who is defending sort of cartel mafia people, and basically he has a fiance, a girlfriend that he wants to provide for economically, and he decides to get involved more actively in a drug trade, and that goes horribly wrong. And the whole tension of this novel, or this screenplay, which makes it nice to read but difficult to adapt, is that McCarthy is writing the counselor as a character, as this symbol of willful blindness, or symbol of complicitness, passive complicitness. The counselor is being warned by all the characters in the novel, in the screenplay, that he probably shouldn't engage in this. Even the other people who are in it, Westray, for instance, who is a more seasoned middleman, who seems to have some reflections, who seems to have some moral, um, moral problems with his own choices, but who sort of ultimately sees that he is on this path that he is, and he can't do anything about it now. but who advises the counselor to not get involved. But the counselor is naive. He is just completely ignorant of what sort of risk it is he's getting himself into, and he's doing it for love or for vanity, however you want to look at it. But it seems that McCarthy wants to write it as if the ambition and the greed of the counselor is what ultimately leads him down this dangerous path. And another typical McCarthy thing in it is that it's not clear in here that the counselor actually ends up dying, but everyone else more or less does, including his fiance, who is the only morally clean character in this story. So that is also a typical McCarthy thing, that innocent people tend to suffer for the choices that um, other people make. There are some interesting and good things in it, but they're buried deep. A couple of interesting things that I noted is how he plays around with character names and with sort of the use of words. Right in the beginning, Laura, the counselor's girlfriend, asks, they're in bed. There's a very un-McCarthy-like, very explicit sex scene in the beginning, and Laura says to her boyfriend, to the counselor, "Are you awake?" And this thematic of being awake sort of comes back a few times, and is symbolical of how the counselor is not aware of what he's doing. He's not aware of the consequences of, in the second and third degree of what he is actually doing. Um, and there are a few other play with words here. There's a interesting scene where Laura says to the counselor after he gives her the diamond that he is a man of impeccable taste, and then she immediately takes that back and says, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." And the you know the meaning of the word impeccable is incapable of peccati, which means incapable of sin. So she's saying to the counselor that he's incapable of sinning, and then she takes it back. Um, and he throws in stuff like that, which is interesting for people who dive deep enough to catch it, but will just sort of be lost in the general flow of the narrative. And the narrative in general is very fast paced, straightforward, and sort of works on a lot of graphical violence and shootouts and stuff like that. So I think it's okay, but um, I think I haven't read The Gardener's Son yet. It's different from what I've read about it than the other plays, because it's written in the 70s. It's written in his Tennessee period, so it focuses more on this Appalachian environment and his thematics on Gnosticism. And I do look forward to reading it. From the three others, I think The Stonemason is the most interesting story, and the one that I would have liked to see in a longer novel. Um, I did like Sunset Limited, but I think it actually comes, it achieves what it can achieve in the format that it is in. And there are some interesting aspects to this, but I don't think this would have benefited particularly from being written into a longer novel. Whereas I think The Stonemason would have worked much better if it had been a 400-page novel. And then The Counselor, should probably have been a sequel to No Country for Old Men. That would have been nice, I think, to look at the same thematics, the same situations with the drug trade around the border, but not focusing on figures like Anton Chigurh, but focusing on the aspect of the drug trade which is only briefly mentioned in No Country for Old Men, which is the corporate aspect, the corporate America. In No Country for Old Men is the oil company that's involved in the drug trade. Here it's the money men, it's the people who are facilitating, people who are money laundering, moving the money around to offshore accounts, and the lawyers who are defending and sort of making legal problems go away. And it would have been interesting to have that as a novel written in the same way as No Country for Old Men. As it is, he wrote it in 5 weeks. It's not bad, but I think it's probably one of his weakest outputs. So that's what I wanted to talk about in relation to Cormac McCarthy's play and McCarthy as a playwright. Despite his best efforts, this is not where he excelled, and we should be happy about that, because if he had made millions of dollars writing screenplays from the 80s, in the 80s and forward, he probably would have continued with that, and we wouldn't have gotten all the great novels that we have. So thank you very much, and see you next time.